Berlin is huge. 80%. I'm actually mind blown right now. That's scary. Insane. Insane. I have no idea what I'm looking at. What is up? Welcome back. Today we're watching a video titled Why Berlin is the Opposite of Every European City. I've heard a lot of things about Berlin, and so in this video, I want to hear exactly why it's so different. What's up? If you haven't met me yet, my name's Aaron, and this is Aaron on a Reacts. Through this channel, we discover everything about Europe. Sports, culture, people, cities, hidden gems, everything you can imagine. If you want to have fun together, if you want to learn together, and if you want to laugh together, make sure to like and subscribe. Now, let's see why Berlin's different.
It's the capital of Germany, and yet it barely feels German at all. It's flat, scattered, covered in graffiti, and has been shaped less by what's been built and more by what's been erased after being at the center of some of Europe's most historical events. But how did it end up like this? How did Berlin survive conflict after conflict and turn into such a distinct, unique city? Well, contrary to popular belief, it doesn't begin with the fall of the Berlin Wall, or even with its post-war reconstruction, but rather centuries earlier. I'd say its story really starts in 1701, when Berlin became the capital of the newly formed Kingdom of Prussia under Frederick I. As Prussia grew, so did Berlin, and the kings made it the centerpiece of culture and the arts, as well as the army. Eventually, the old defensive walls around Berlin became useless, and a new one, accommodating for its growth, known as the Berlin Customs Wall, was erected in 1737. It had no purpose outside of taxing the movement of goods in and out of the city. But the reason I'm mentioning it is because we get to see how the borders of Berlin began to take shape. And trust me, this is all relevant.
Do you know what he's talking about? He's going somewhere with this.
When Germany began their Industrial Revolution in 1830, it led to a mass migration from rural areas to the cities. Thanks to Berlin's central position in the fast-growing German railway network, they stood to gain the most from it. Their population shot up from 220,000 in 1825 to 464,000 in 1858, which meant that they needed to redesign the city to accommodate for the rapid population growth. Just a year later, a man named James Hobrecht was appointed by the Royal Prussian Urban Planning Police to head the commission on creation of a land use plan for Berlin and its surroundings. He traveled to Hamburg, Paris, and London in 1860 to study how other major cities were approaching urban planning, especially their sewer systems. Soon after, the Berlin Customs Wall was removed and the many outlying suburbs of Berlin, like Wedding and Moabit, were incorporated into the city. It was only in 1862 that Hobrecht's Plan, as it's known, was finalized. This is what it looked like. At this time, some European capital cities focused on large-scale redevelopment of their cores, such as Haussmann's renovation of Paris and Vienna's Ringstrasse, while the majority of others grew more irregularly, like Lisbon or Warsaw, for example. By contrast, Berlin opted for an expansive, state-organized approach to rapid population growth by creating a modern grid of streets and blocks far beyond its existing core. It pre-planned infrastructure for districts that didn't even exist yet to sustain a population of up to 2 million people, while leaving the inner city alone.
Wait, real quick, how big is Berlin? Is it 2 million? Is it bigger than 2 million? This is a huge plan, and clearly we're about to get in some reconstruction here.
Borders themselves were decided by incorporating the land between the torn-down customs wall and a railway line being constructed to encircle the city. This area came to be known architecturally as the Wilhelmina Ring. Looking at it, there are dozens of arterial roads entering the city. Unlike the urban planning of Paris, Hobrecht did respect the existing roads, villages, and railways, including them in the planning process. Public squares and gardens were a key organizing element of the plan, with planners required to carve these out in a regular pattern across the expansion area, distributed 350 to 600 meters apart, ensuring that shared public space was accessible on foot by anyone from anywhere in the city. Many of these squares, like Zionskirtsplatz or Boxhagener Platz, still define neighborhood life today, making Berlin uniquely polycentric. For the most part, these plans were more spatial than specific with infrastructure, initially intended for a time frame of about 50 years. But that wasn't all that Hobrecht did. See, after his design for Berlin, he went to Stettin, or now Szczecin in Poland, where he was tasked with designing a modern sewer system. When he returned to Berlin in 1869, he was then commissioned on recreating that success in Berlin, which at the time had no underground sewage system and was in catastrophic need of sanitation improvements to accompany the rapidly growing population. The famous British health expert Edwin Chadwick called Berlin the most foul-smelling, dirtiest and most pestilent capital in the civilized world.
Berlin used to smell terrible. They didn't have sewage at this time with a huge population. Wow, that's something I'm learning right now.
In 1872. So what Hobrecht did was propose this plan a year later. A radial system of canals, dividing the city into 12 parts, each with a pumping station that distributed wastewater from the city to new sewage farms on the outskirts of Berlin, where it could be filtered naturally by soil and used for agriculture. This system was one of the most cutting-edge drainage systems of its time, and led to Berlin acquiring the reputation of the cleanest city in the world by the early 1900s, just a decade after its full completion. After the spatial network and sewer system were set up, then came the infrastructure itself. The Prussian building regulations of 1887, which were based on Hobrecht's work, set the standards for the designs of Berlin. These regulations standardized the iconic Blockrand model, large areas of dense urban city blocks with mixed-use buildings reaching to the street and offering a common-used courtyard. Height limits were tied up to street length, usually at about 5 stories tall max, and they had to have access to Hobrecht's modern sewer system. Despite Hobrecht's plan initially intending to be relevant for a period of 50 years, the reality is that it's still responsible for much of the current Berlin we see today. Because the next massive shift happened in 1920 with the Greater Berlin Act. This massively expanded the German capital from 66 square kilometers to 883, making it almost...
Hold on a second. Like 12 times bigger? 15 times bigger than it was? Berlin is huge. Oh my gosh.
9 times the size of Paris, while doubling its population overnight from 2 million to nearly 4 million people, making it the third largest city in the world. Because the Hobrecht Plan had already laid the skeletal grid for future expansion, merging towns like Charlottenburg or Köpenick in 1920 wasn't pure administrative chaos. They could be plugged into an existing spatial logic. Even new areas incorporated that fell outside of Hobrecht's original map could follow it. In 1924, the railway system that connected Berlin to its neighboring cities and villages was electrified and transformed into the S-Bahn, 22 years after the completion of the U-Bahn, which we'll get into soon. As we get into the 1940s, obviously the development of Berlin became massively shaped by World War II. And yes, I know we skipped over World War I, but the reality is the fabric of the city itself didn't really change during it. So while we all know what World War II was about, what we need to focus on specifically is the bombing of Berlin. The city was subject to 363 air raids during the war, from 1940 till the very end. For the first few years, specifically till 1942, there was a policy of bombing only targets of direct military significance instead of entire areas. But as the Germans started targeting British cities, the Allies did too. Although this would cause large-scale civilian casualties, it was judged as a necessary decision given it was total war. By the end of the war, approximately 80% of Berlin's inner city was destroyed.
80%? They had to build it basically from the ground up. I did not know it was that much.
And 33% of the city's total area was. The total deaths were anywhere from 20,000 to 50,000, with 1.7 million or 40% of the population having fled too. So Berlin was ruined. This is where things started to get interesting. See, after the war, Germany was fully occupied by the Allied powers, and Berlin, despite being deep inside the Soviet-controlled territory, specifically was carved up as well. Over the next few years, the Western Allies pulled their zones of Germany together into a single state, West Germany, while the Soviet zone became East Germany. That created one of the strangest maps of the 20th century, a small island of the West surrounded by the East. Because Berlin's reconstruction happened under occupation by 2 completely different world superpowers, it meant they grew in completely different ways, unlike anything ever seen in Europe before. This was further solidified when the Berlin Wall went up in 1961 at the height of the Cold War, turning Berlin's political divide into a concrete one. So if we are to look at Berlin, we have to see it in two different ways: West Berlin and East Berlin. West Berlin developed in a Western way, through market-driven modernization. New housing estates like the Hansa Viertel had more open space and less dense layouts. Given that Berlin's historic heart, Mitte, was located in the east, the West redeveloped squares like Breitscheidplatz to reinforce its center of commerce and culture. The iconic boulevard Kurfürstendamm became a vibrant commercial spine of shops, cafes, everything.
So West Berlin was doing amazing. East Berlin, I imagine he's about to say, it was not doing so well. This is really interesting and blowing my mind. If you're liking the video so far, make sure to like and subscribe. And you'll see more videos like this in the future. But let's continue to learn about East Berlin here.
Meanwhile, in East Berlin, we saw a more state-planned vision of the city. The city was rebuilt as a showcase of the socialist ideal: monumental, orderly, and collective. In the 1950s, this meant grand axial boulevards like Stalinallee, today's Karl Marx Alley, lined with apartment blocks wide enough for tanks and parades, and flanked by green promenades and public squares. But by the 60s and 70s, the East evolved from Stalinist styles to more functional modernism. Entire districts like Marzahn and Lichtenberg were built using Plattenbau slabs. Basically these, arranged around open lawns, playgrounds, and collective amenities. They were basically arranged as micro-cities. Because public transportation systems were also split in two when the wall came up, literally, there was also a difference in how the city functioned. For example, although the S-Bahn network served all of Berlin, it was operated by the East German State Railway, which meant every ticket sale funded the communist regime. As a result, West Berliners boycotted the S-Bahn en masse. Ridership plummeted from over 600 million trips annually to barely 50 million by the 1970s, eventually making up just a 5% share of public transport. These people shifted entirely to the Berlin Transport Company, or BVG for short, which ran all of Berlin's transit systems: trams, buses, and the U-Bahn. But here's the thing. The BVG got completely split up as well, into the BVG West and BVG East. Lines were mostly cut at the borders, and the tunnels were blocked. So those in West Berlin, to make up for not using the S-Bahn, did a few things. The first thing they did was destroy the tram network on their side, seeing it as outdated, to make way for car and bus-oriented traffic, much like the US. The bus services began to parallel the S-Bahn lines, providing an alternative.
Hold on a second. This is so fascinating. Like, I'm actually mind blown right now. They destroyed their tram network to make room for cars and buses. They knew what was happening and developing, while the East was kind of still in that old style. Like, this is insane.
In addition, with most of the U-Bahn located in West Berlin, it was also massively expanded. Take a look at this map of how the Berlin Wall separated the U-Bahn. If you took line 8, every station on the east side was closed. The trains still ran through them though, they just didn't stop. And these eastern stations became known as the famous ghost stations. Meanwhile, if you took line 6, it only stopped at Friedrichstrasse, which became the only crossing point between the two sides, with strict border controls. Meanwhile, in East Germany, they not only kept their terms, but expanded them. It was already extensive on their side before the split, as well as cheap. Plus, it matched the socialist ideology of emphasizing public transportation over private car ownership. If you look at the map, this divide is still visible even today. Berlin truly became a city of two ideologically different countries. At this time, don't get me wrong, West Berlin was a way better and freer place to live than East Berlin. That's why there were people trying to escape, why the wall was built, etc., etc. But West Berlin wasn't perfect either. I mean, the fact that it was basically a Western enclave surrounded by East Germany and 160 kilometers from its own borders.
That's scary. That is scary, actually, when you think about it like that.
Meant supply chains were a nightmare, and its existence was somewhat unstable in many people's eyes. So in this sense, West Germany moved their capital to Bonn, and many companies moved to other places. Deutsche Bank to Frankfurt, Allianz to Munich, and so on. Berlin had ceased to exist as an economic capital like it used to. 300,000 people had left between 1960 and 1980. So now, when the Berlin Wall fell in 1989 and German reunification happened a year later, along with Berlin becoming the capital again, which are miracles in its own right due to the complexity of it, we saw the next chapter of Berlin's unique evolution begin. Let me explain. After reunification, many West Berliners who'd felt trapped in the enclave suddenly were able to flee outward to greener, cheaper Brandenburg suburbs. Meanwhile, East Berliners were able to move westward, chasing jobs in Bavaria or the Rhine-Ruhr region, especially since many state-owned industries collapsed almost overnight during privatization. This meant that there was a lot of empty space in Berlin that could be used creatively, and it also meant the city was extremely affordable to live in. Naturally, artists, students, squatters, the kind of people who thrive on chaos, moved in. The economic vacuum of Berlin was exactly what made it magnetic to those who weren't chasing money but space. Berlin became Europe's largest playground for experimentation. Abandoned power stations turned into iconic nightclubs like the Berghain and Tresor. Squatted buildings like Tacheles became art centers, and others like Kopi 137 turned into anarchist communes. The city...
Insane. Insane. So that's why Berlin is the way it is today, is because of this period. Wow.
His post-reunification comeback was led by creativity more than anything else. As its former mayor Klaus Wowereit put it, this made Berlin poor but attractive. This is where Berlin's cultural distinctness comes from, why many say they have an unmatched freedom there to be whatever they want without being judged, because that's the kind of experimentalism the city was revived by. The 1994 Berlin Land Use Plan was the first unified master plan created after reunification, and still serves as a guiding planning document for connecting today's Berlin. Since its adoption, it's been continuously amended, not replaced, to reflect new priorities, from housing expansion to green infrastructure. Today, Berlin has become a model for European urban design. Most European big cities radiate outward from a relatively well-defined center. Thanks to the Hobrecht Plan and having been divided, Berlin has no single city center. Obviously, there's Mitte, but there's also Alexanderplatz, Unter den Linden, Friedrichstraße, Kurfürstendamm, and so on. Some tourists would even think of Potsdamer Platz too. If we're to look at its reunified public transportation, it's amazing. Yet,
all right, as an American looking at that, I have no idea what I'm looking at. No clue. Never been on the railway. Don't really know how to navigate that map. It looks crazy.
There's a map of it in its entirety. This is the U-Bahn, this is the S-Bahn, and this is the DB Regio, which we'll ignore for now as it's the regional train for longer distances. The U-Bahn, being reunified now, has 9 integrated lines and 175 stations, serving over 350 million people annually, while the S-Bahn has 16 lines, 168 stations, and a ridership of over 450 million people per year. What stands out the most, though, is this line right here, the famous Ringbahn. It's a long circle route around Berlin's inner city area, almost mirroring this if you remember it, the Ring Railway in 1877. It ties together Berlin's patchwork of many cities into one living network. It's the line that defines Berlin's shape without ever touching its center. Lastly, 44% of Berlin is made up of green spaces. 70% of more than 3.8 million people within its city limits live within 500 meters of nature. The city is covered with more parks, gardens, and forested areas than any other European city. So it's uniquely green too. What this has all led to is Berlin becoming one of the most unique cities in the world. Not because it's the richest or the most powerful, but because it's unlike anywhere else. It's not Germany's financial center or industrial heart. Instead, Berlin has become something rarer, a capital of creativity, born from the reconstruction in the 40s to the
Insane video. Insane video. I learned so much about Berlin in general, from the beginning to the rebuild to the communist times. Insane. I mean, if you learned something with me just now, and if you have an opinion of yourself about Berlin, I've never been, so I'd love to hear from you. Please let me know. And if you learned something new and if you enjoyed that video, make sure to like and subscribe. I'm going to keep exploring Europe, and I want you right there with me. So I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.